It's a pleasure to have you here, and I think before we even get into the baseball and the experience, this has been a very difficult day for the country, for Belgium, and I figured that this would be an opportunity for you to address the many millions who are watching.
Well, I appreciate that. I had a chance to talk to the Belgian Prime Minister early this morning, right after the explosion had happened, and this is just one more example of why the entire world has to unite against these terrorists. The notion that any political agenda would justify the killing of innocent people like this is something that's beyond the pale. We are going to continue with the over 60 nations that are pounding ISIL and going to go after them. In the meantime, obviously, our thoughts and prayers are with those who've been lost and hoping for a speedy recovery for those who've been injured.
I understand. What would you say your experience has been like here for 72 hours, given the goals that you had?
Well, for 50 years, we had no contact with this country, and it was not serving our ultimate goal, which is freedom and opportunity for the Cuban people. And we initiated a new policy of engagement, not out of naivete. We understand that the government here continues to control all aspects of life, that individual freedoms continue to be curtailed, but our belief is that if you've got more Americans traveling, if you've got more commerce, if you've got more interaction, if our ideas and our culture is penetrating this society, that over time that gives us more leverage to advocate for the values that we care about. And obviously the Cuban American community is such a central part of the American experience. We consulted a lot with Cuban Americans before we initiated this change. There's a debate within the community as to whether this is appropriate or not, because there's still a lot of anger and frustration about the history of what the Cuban exiles experienced. But my view has been that if you do something for 50 years and it doesn't work, you got to try something else. And we're going to continue, as we said yesterday at the press conference and in my speech today, to amplify our concerns about human rights, about people who are being arbitrarily detained or harassed just for speaking their minds or expressing their political views. But this now gives us more leverage and a greater platform to advocate for the things we
Would you say then there's momentum for what you're doing based on what you've experienced here?
The good news is what we're seeing is that there's overall support in the United States for this change in policy, but perhaps more importantly, the majority of Cubans, a strong majority of Cubans support it. Now, I met with some dissidents before I came here, those who supported this change in policy, a few who thought that it somehow rewarded or validated the existing government. But what I explained to them is that we will continue to speak out loudly on the things that we care about. That's not going to change. But isolation had, in some ways, empowered those who didn't want to see change, because essentially they were in a position to blame all the problems that they had here on the United States, and we could not do what I did today, which is speak to the entire Cuban population and talk about the values that America cares about and the extraordinary success that Cuban Americans have had when they have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the ability to start their own businesses and so forth.
Mr. President, I'm a first-generation Cuban American raised in Puerto Rico.
Absolutely.
I spent the last 72 hours with my family that has never left Cuba.
Right.
They're here.
Right.
They had their children. They're contemporary with my age, 46.
Right.
What do you tell them and their children about having hope for the future?
I think our goal is that if, as a consequence of the changes in policy, you start seeing small businesses emerge, and you're starting to see people being able to drive their own car or open up their own barbershop and get their own income. If we start seeing more American tourists coming, if we continue to see the remittances, meaning the cash that Cuban Americans earn, being able to send it back to their families, then over time, your families here, other families, they can start building their own small nest eggs. Maybe they can start a business. We're going to continue to put pressure so that people now can be hired not through the government but on their own. And by creating those pockets of freedom and opportunity, over time, changing attitudes start beginning to happen. And people start thinking, you know what, I don't have to risk traveling to Miami in order to succeed. Potentially, I can succeed here. And the more we can create these pockets of opportunity and hope here, when you see the incredible talent and skill and innovation of the Cuban people, I have no doubt that eventually change is going to come.
Well, Mr. President, full disclosure, I played for the Chicago Cubs.
You know what? I like the Chicago connection, and, you know, when we're in Cuba, Cubs, White Sox, it doesn't matter.
Well, speaking of social change, Mr. President, Jackie Robinson's legacy. You made a personal commitment bringing in Rachel Robinson, Sharon Robinson, the family here just for this moment, this special connection. So what do you see that connection ties to not only your life and presidency, but also what you see in the future in this potential relationship between the United States and Cuba?
Well, if you think about Jackie Robinson playing in this ballpark a couple of months before he breaks the color barrier in Major League Baseball, and then to have his wife, who's one of the loveliest people I know, and I still don't believe she's actually 90 years old, because she is gorgeous. And I've gotten a chance to know her and the Robinson family. I've said this before. That's the power of baseball. That's the power of sports. It can change attitudes sometimes in ways that a politician can never change. A speech can't change. You know, all those kids who started growing up watching the Brooklyn Dodgers, and suddenly they're rooting for a black man on the field, and how that affects their attitudes, laying the groundwork for the civil rights movement. That's a legacy that all of us have benefited from, black and white and Latino and Asian, because what it did was it taught America that it's the skills, it's the talent, it's the character, and not the color that matters. Now, we still have a long way to go. You know, that's true in our everyday life. It's true in our sports, right? I mean, you know, if you look at the number of African American managers, if you look at the number of Latino managers in baseball or owners, obviously there's still a carryover from the past. But the thing that I emphasized in the speech today to the Cuban people, and the thing that we can be so proud of as Americans, is not that we're perfect, but that we have the capacity to change. And Jackie Robinson represents the best of that change.
Given what happened to the not coming to the game today, and it's clear that you're enjoying the game. Your wife in particular seems to be really enjoying the game as a baseball fan.
Well, she was upset about a couple of these.
The great catch in center field didn't sit well. She liked the catch.
You know, couple of calls, right?
A couple of the calls. Yeah, I noticed the strike zone's a little wide so far, at least on the other side. But you know, you always have a little home field advantage.
That's the Chicago in you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a challenge when you have a terrorist attack anywhere in the world, particularly in this age of 24/7 news coverage. You want to be respectful and understand the gravity of the situation. But the whole premise of terrorism is to try to disrupt people's ordinary lives. And one of my most powerful memories and one of my proudest moments as president was watching Boston respond after the marathon. And when Ortiz went out and said, probably the only time that America didn't have a problem with somebody, person on live TV, was when he talked about Boston and how strong it was and that it was not going to be intimidated. And that is the kind of resilience and the kind of strength that we have to continually show in the face of these terrorists. They cannot defeat America. They can't. They don't produce anything. They don't have a message that appeals to the vast majority of Muslims or the vast majority of people around the world. What they can do is scare and make people afraid and disrupt our daily lives and divide us. And as long as we don't allow that to happen, we're going to be okay.
I've seen you throw out the first pitch. You didn't play much baseball, did you?
You know what? Now,
Eduardo, come on.
Can I just make a point? My dad wasn't a Hall of Famer. So, you know, you had a slight benefit in the whole pitching thing. I will say this, and I've talked to President Bush about this. I've talked to other folks. We do a lot of tough stuff as president, and by definition, you don't end up being president if you don't handle stress well.